Since the first settlers crossed the Mississippi, the Midwest has been at the center of the United States agriculture industry. In Iowa, the agricultural economy has not been limited to grain production, but also the raising and processing of livestock. Beginning in the late 19th century, many Iowa towns became manufacturing hubs, employing thousands of laborers in factory work. Ottumwa, Iowa was one such town. One of the largest employers in town was John Morrell, which slaughtered and processed pork and beef. The company moved its headquarters to Ottumwa in 1877. By the 1930s, a plant this size could process over 1 million hogs per year. After employing only men for the first 60 years, Morrell's Ottumwa plant began to open its doors to female workers in 1933, as a last resort when the company stopped employing boys under the age of 16. Women needing to add to their family's income showed up at the Morrell Employment Office for work. Positions in the packing plants and other manufacturing industries offered women much higher pay than what was available through traditional women's work in the home care, food service industries. Making 37 or 38 cents an hour in 1936 was a huge improvement over the 10 cents an hour one could expect from babysitting. Though the pay was higher, the job security in the packing plants was often no better than the jobs they had left. In 1937, the Ottumwa John Morrell plant became the first local of the United Packing House Workers of America, or UPWA, to organize under the Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO. During the early days of the UPWA, women and men's work was split distinctively. Women began working in newly formed departments that boxed processed meat such as bacon, canned ham, and sausage. These jobs were known for their high-speed hand work, and women were thought to have higher hand dexterity than their male counterparts. Even though these jobs were thought to need the special skills only women possessed, they were classified as unskilled and had the lowest pay rates in the packing house. The bombing of Pearl Harbor not only marked the entrance of the U.S. into the Second World War, but also women into labor positions that had previously been reserved for men only. Encouraged by the government to do their part, as well as their own economic interests, women signed up to work in manufacturing positions. In Ottumwa, the Morrell plant began to allow women to work on the cut floor, which paid a significantly higher wage than the women's departments. While the work was physically demanding, the pay women received was enough motivation to keep them coming back to work.
So you went to work on a man's job. Were you the first ladies to be hired on a men's job,
yes,
so far as you know?
On a Saturday. Yes, we were the first ones, and we were interviewed they had interviewed other girls to go into maybe other departments where predominantly women departments. And then they told us that this is all they had to offer, and were we still interested? Well, 59 cents an hour, that was the wages then, and 59 cents an hour for women in the women's department, and 72 and 74 and 77 and a half, that's the kind of wages that they paid back in 1942 for the men's jobs. But that looked good. And my first check was $62, and I thought I was wealthy, because that was the most money that I'd ever made in 1 week.
What sort of work did you do in the men's department?
Well, when my first assignment to the job, they had taken us to the storeroom, and they told us to wear warm clothing, because I had a feeling that I thought I was going to go in the freezers. And then they dropped this ugly-looking white canvas tent, I would say, over the top of us, and we had to cover our hair, and so they told us to either wear a hat or wrap our hair up in a bandana or one of those turbans, and so I wore a turban, and because my hair was quite long then, and so they had taken us up, and I can't remember how many women went into the packing floor, but there wasn't, I don't think there could have been much over 4 or 5, and there must have been 50 to 75 jobs in there, so you can imagine how scared you are when you walk into this big place with these freezer pipes running down both sides. And they took me over to this skid, and in this big gondola was these great big livers, which I never saw livers like that. I always thought they were sliced, you know, when you bought them in the store. And they must have weighed all of pretty close to 5 pounds. And here's a pitchfork, and they said, now you're to fill this box. When you get it full, you shove it down at the end of the skid for them to take off and put on the platform. And I don't think I weighed much over 118 pounds then. And by the end of the day, I don't think I could even lift my fork to feed myself. Because when I walked in the door, I thought I was the most abused person in the whole world. And I just knew I was never going back to that job again. I was dirty, blood all over me. And I'd never been that dirty before. But you learn to swallow your pride. When you look at the big paycheck, you swallow your pride. And
Ottumwa's Local Number 1 had heated debates within its leadership over how the new shift of women into men's departments should affect plant seniority. A bargaining committee member remembers arguing with the chief steward over whether women should get the same seniority rights as men in the cut department.
I said, okay. I says, you give them seniority. They hire them, you give them seniority. And then the war's over. Here's guys coming back to work, walking the street, and these women's working. Well, he says you can't do away with seniority. And him and I, we got into being bitter enemies over that because I didn't agree with him. I said they should be set aside, and when these men come back, they should be laid off. But he didn't agree with it.
Instead of keeping a single list, the leadership compromised on a seniority system that allowed women seniority rights, but men and women's seniority would be kept on separate lists. Most of the women working the men's jobs did so knowing they would only work them while the men were at war. Unlike their cousins, Wendy the welder and Rosie the riveter, packing house Patties were not laid off en masse after the war. Rather, they were transferred back to the predominantly female departments they had occupied before the war.
And we had the understanding that when the war was over and the men come back, that we would step back from these jobs, and the company would make jobs for us in the predominantly female departments. And so we knew that as the men returned from the war, that we voluntarily would give these up. And
you knew that when you were hired, or soon
yes.
after you were hired?
Yes, we knew that at the time that we were hired. But we were with the understanding that the company would make a place for us in the industry. They would not just say, we're done and that's it.
This statement given by Ethel Jarrett was echoed by other women in the Morrell plant who seemed to acknowledge that giving up their high-paying men's jobs was a prerequisite for being hired in the first place. Despite conflicts between the UPWA and Morrell management, including a long strike in 1948 over wages, business stayed robust for the next 10 years after the end of the war. However, by the mid-1950s, the boom from the war years had begun to slow down, and businesses, including Morrell, began to feel the pinch. As a result, the company began to turn to industrial engineering to make its processes more efficient. Industrial engineering departments employed scientific measurement techniques that used time production measurements and incentive pay to create a more efficient and in turn a more profitable business. An incentive program called Gain Time was employed at the Morrell Packing House in the 1950s. Let's give an example of how Gain Time worked using the sliced bacon department. Let's say that you have 9 hours in your workday. The industrial engineers have determined that at the current pace, you should be able to produce 1,000 shingles of bacon per day. So, in a 9-hour workday, you will make $9 at the pay of $1 per hour, no matter how many shingles of bacon are made. As an incentive to work faster, the company decides that if you can get this work done quicker, they will pay you for your entire 9-hour shift, and you get to leave work early. So under Gain Time, you still produce 1,000 shingles of bacon in, let's say, 8 hours by working faster than the standard. Plus, you still get paid $9 for the day and get an hour of free time. While this may seem like the perfect world, this system eventually gave the company the means to justify higher peace standards. Using our example, the next time the industrial engineers went around to determine standards, the performance of workers would indicate that the standard number of pieces should be 1,125 shingles of bacon a day instead of 1,000. This meant, according to production standards, workers needed less hours in a day to accomplish their work. This was done by reducing the number of people working in a department, or by reducing the number of hours a department ran in a day. Quickly, the layoffs began to escalate in female-dominated departments of sausage, sliced bacon, and canning. By the early 60s, diminishing female positions forced women with over 10 years of seniority into layoff, while men with much less seniority were still working. At the same time, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Title VII of this legislation established that it was illegal to discriminate against a person due to their sex. After exhausting their union options, 30 women that had been laid off from the Morrell plant filed one of the first sexual discrimination claims with the newly formed Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, in 1965. In an attempt to comply with the new legislation, the UPWA International designed and implemented a new seniority system. This system kept the designations of men and women's positions, but added a third that included either men or women. It was called the ABC system. This system seemed to have caused more problems than it solved, when women hired into the newly created C category were driven off of their jobs within hours. Having exhausted their avenues for help through the union, in 1966, a group of 21 women who had been laid off filed a lawsuit against the company and the union. The ABC system had only been in place for 1 month. There were women and men on both sides of the issue. Women who supported the lawsuit sometimes had to endure harassment, both at work and at home.
The company would add a heavier element to a job. Maybe a job would be like making boxes or stamping hogs, and then she'd have to go over and maybe lift a big platform and pull it out the end of a skid, which was never done before. It had never done before. And by 7 o'clock, by 9 o'clock, I think all the women were back out again, and I had to go to Kansas City for a meeting then, and Ed Silverman was down there, and I told him, stay out. I'm going to Kansas City, and that was when I was threatened. I was threatened that if these women went back on the job, that they would wait for me in the alley. And I had a private parking place and wait in the alley, and then I got a call that my little girl was in school, and she couldn't have been over 6 then, and they had threatened me with her. And we'd had a meeting at the Coliseum, and I got up and I told every one of them that that my children were threatened, and my home, we built a new home out in the country, and because I was opposing, I was speaking out is what I was doing. I was speaking out, and they had taken ketchup and put ketchup all over the walls in my husband's bedroom, and it was the light beige and paint.
They broke into your house?
We lived out in the country then. We lived way out at a dead-end road, and they'd taken paint. I don't know who did it. I don't have any idea who did it, but paint all over the new carpeting in the living room, had ripped the drapes off from the living room, and I never did ever tell anybody how much damage was done to the home, because my pride wouldn't let me, because I wasn't about to let anybody know they were going to get me down. And we had a meeting at the Coliseum, and they said, all right, when we're going back, and this is the way it is. And that's when I got up, and I talked to Dave Hart, and I got up and I told him just exactly what had happened. And I hadn't got home. I went to the school and got my little girl and took her down to my mother's, and I told him that I was not going to stop fighting, that this is the way it was. I'm going to get all my eggs in one basket, then you'll all know just exactly what I'm going to do. And that's when I made up my mind then that we'd paid dues all of these years, we were union members, we were entitled to just as much as any male that walked through that, or anyone at all, because that's what the union stands for. And, I got made fun of for saying that. But what the heck, if you're going to worry about being made fun of, you wouldn't have got up in the first place. And I probably was the one that spoke out the most at all of the meetings at the Coliseum because, like I said, if you've got anything to say about anything that's brought up or anything that's voted on and you don't like the way it's going, say it then. Don't say it when you go out the door.
Rights was not the goal of all women. Some women wanted nothing to do with the push to enter traditionally male jobs.
I didn't want a man's job. I wanted a job that was easy enough that I could do. I didn't want to learn how to use a knife. I didn't want to carry a 100-pound bag or a 200-pound bag or whatever I had to do, or push a truck loaded with meat. No way.
You had to get your own crate. It was on a line, and you had to push it. Well, then when you got that basket got full, you had to push it around. Well, that was really a little more than a woman should be doing. I guess that's why we're not in such good shape today.
Somebody told me, I won't mention the name to you, but told me that the union supported the suit by the 21 women. The union leadership did.
Well, I would have to say they did in a way.
What do you mean in a way?
Because they sued the company.
And the union both.
Well, but the union was trying not, I don't know how to say it, not to...
I know what you mean.
Show partiality. Because they had good workers for women, good workers for men. But that's the way it was. I would have to say they did favor to a certain extent, yes.
Now, on the whole, what was the feeling of the women about the suit? Not the 21 women, but the women in the plant. Were you happy with the way it was, or just wanted minor changes, or you thought these 21 women were troublemakers, or
Some of them were, yes.
What was that, Sue?
Some of them were, yes.
Yeah.
They were troublemakers.
I could name a couple, but I won't.
So this is a very important thing, because the packing plants all across the country changed about that time. I talked to a lot of women, and I found so far very few that supported the changes that took place, because sometimes they thought they were put in very hard jobs.
We were. Like I am.
Now, did either one of you go to a knife job after the suit, after it changed around?
I never did.
I did not know part of a knife job.
Sue, why was that?
I'd seen my husband's hands cut up too much with knives, and I did not know part of it. They had to be as sharp as razors. I did use a knife up in Canning when I sliced hocks, but
sliced hocks. Yeah, I did that too, Sue, but
not on a chain line or conveyor line.
No, not on conveyor. Oh, I did on the pound and a half line, yeah, for hams.
But you weren't anxious to go to kill or cut?
Oh,
or
heavens,
like that.
no, not me.
The Federal District Court out of Des Moines, Iowa, threw out the case against the union based on a technicality, and gave Morrell time to settle the case out of court. The women eventually agreed to a small settlement of $450 apiece. The ABC system's legality was tenuous at best, as it still placed boundaries to employment based on sex. But by the late 60s, concerns surrounding the state of the company and the facility began to mount, and women's concerns were once again pushed to the back burner. In 1972, the EEOC finally declared that the ABC system did not follow the guidelines set forth in Title VII. Unfortunately, the women of the UPWA Local 1 did not get to see the fruits of their labor. The John Morrell plant shuttered its doors in 1973. However, when the plant reopened under Hormel management in 1983, there were no longer seniority distinctions between men and women. The history left to us by the packing house workers of Ottumwa's John Morrell plant not only gives us the insight into a time gone by, they allow us to understand our own workplaces and communities more fully. The women of the 60s and 70s pushed against tradition to ensure their personal economic security, and they also provided building blocks for greater equality in the workplace today.